I'm Olivia Morgan, 35, and for 12 years I lived with the pain of being completely cut off from my family, all because of a lie my sister told. They believed her without question, without giving me a chance to defend myself. I lost everything: my parents, my childhood home, even my identity as a daughter. Yesterday I received a letter that changed everything. My sister confessed. And now my family wants me back. But revenge isn't always about making others suffer, sometimes it's about reclaiming what was stolen from you. Before I dive into the whole painful story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you've ever experienced family betrayal, or you just love a good karma story, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling community. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how justice finally served my sister the cold dish she deserved after 12 long years. Growing up in the picturesque suburb of Maplewood, Connecticut, our family was the envy of the neighborhood. My parents, Richard and Eleanor Morgan, had built a successful real estate business from the ground up. Our colonial-style home, with its pristine white picket fence and perfectly manicured lawn, was featured twice in the local Homes of Distinction magazine. From the outside, we were the quintessential American dream family. My sister Charlotte was 3 years younger than me, but you wouldn't know it from how my parents treated her. While I was the responsible straight-A student who followed rules and met expectations, Charlotte was the family darling, spontaneous, charming, and somehow always forgiven for her transgressions. "She's just finding herself," my mother would say, when Charlotte missed curfew or failed a class. Meanwhile, I was lectured for getting an A instead of an A+. Despite the obvious favoritism, I loved my family deeply. I especially adored my grandfather Harold, who lived with us after my grandmother passed. He was the one person who seemed to see me clearly. "You're the foundation, Olivia," he would tell me during our chess games in his study. "Without foundations, even the prettiest houses crumble." I didn't fully understand what he meant then, but those words would haunt me years later. My relationship with Charlotte was complicated. As children, we were close, building blanket forts in the living room and creating elaborate imaginary worlds. As we entered our teens, something shifted. Charlotte became increasingly competitive with me, though I never saw it as a competition. When I was accepted to Yale, my dream school and our father's alma mater, Charlotte's congratulations seemed hollow. When I brought home my first serious boyfriend, Michael, during sophomore year of college, Charlotte watched him with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "You're paranoid," my mother said when I mentioned it. "Your sister admires you. Don't create problems where there aren't any." So I dismissed my concerns and focused on building my future. By 23, I had graduated with honors and secured a position at a prestigious marketing firm in New York City. Michael and I were discussing marriage, and I was designing a life that felt true to who I was, independent from my family's expectations, but still connected to them. What I didn't realize was that Charlotte had been constructing a narrative of her own. Throughout our childhood and teenage years, she had been carefully cultivating my parents' perception of her as the misunderstood, sensitive child who needed protection, especially from her controlling older sister. Small comments here and there. Olivia told me my dress looked cheap at the Johnsons' party, or Olivia said I shouldn't even bother applying to good schools with my grades. None of which were true. Looking back, I can see the pattern so clearly now. Charlotte was playing a long game and I was oblivious to the rules. Even when she dropped out of college after one semester to find herself through a series of part-time jobs and ill-fated relationships, my parents continued to funnel emotional and financial support her way. Meanwhile, they expected me to stand on my own, which I did proudly. The real turning point came when our grandfather was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months, but he was determined to update his will and get his affairs in order immediately. I took time off work to help him, spending evenings organizing his papers and listening to stories about his youth. Those evenings in his study became sacred to me, one adult to another, no longer just grandfather and granddaughter. What I didn't know then was that Charlotte had been having her own private conversations with him. "Just checking in on Grandpa," she'd say breezily as she slipped into his room with tea he never asked for. I thought she was finally stepping up, showing maturity. I was proud of her. If only I'd known what she was really doing. 2 weeks before grandfather passed, I noticed a change in how my parents treated me. Subtle at first, my mother letting calls go to voicemail, my father's terse responses to my questions about grandfather's medication schedule. I attributed it to stress and grief. We were all struggling with the impending loss. The night before grandfather died, I sat holding his hand as he drifted in and out of consciousness. "The safe behind the painting," he whispered. "Remember what matters." Before I could ask what he meant, he fell back asleep and Charlotte appeared at the doorway. "I'll sit with him," she said. "Mom says you need to eat something." I kissed grandfather's forehead and left, not knowing it would be the last coherent conversation we would have. He passed away the following afternoon, with all of us surrounding his bed. In that moment of shared grief, I felt connected to my family in our collective loss. Little did I know that connection was about to be severed irrevocably. The bomb dropped 3 days after the funeral. I arrived at my parents' house to help sort through grandfather's belongings, only to find them, Charlotte and our family lawyer, sitting stiffly in the living room. "Olivia," my father said, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it, "we need to talk about what you did." The accusation came like a thunderbolt from a clear sky. Charlotte claimed she had discovered that I had been manipulating grandfather into changing his will in my favor. According to her, I had been systematically turning him against the rest of the family during those private evenings in his study, painting Charlotte as money-hungry and my parents as waiting vultures for his estate. "We have proof," Charlotte said, her eyes brimming with tears, that in retrospect were as false as her words. "Grandpa told me everything before he died. He felt so used, Olivia. How could you?" The proof was a journal allegedly written by grandfather detailing his disappointment in discovering my true nature. The handwriting looked like his, but the sentiments were foreign to the man I knew. Still, it was enough to convince my grief-stricken parents. I was stunned, speechless in the face of such a calculated betrayal. When I finally found my voice to deny it all, my protests fell on deaf ears. The foundation of trust had been shattered. "I want you out of this house," my father declared, his voice trembling with a rage I'd never witnessed directed at me before. "And I want you out of our lives." My mother sat rigidly beside him, her eyes downcast, unable to look at me. Charlotte stood slightly behind them, her expression a perfect mask of hurt and betrayal, but I caught it just for a split second, the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. "Satisfaction. You don't understand," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "I would never do this. That journal isn't real. Grandfather and I talked about his life, his memories, never about turning against you." "Then explain this," my father said, sliding a document across the coffee table. It was an amendment to grandfather's will, dated just 2 weeks before his death. The paper trembled in my hands as I read it. Grandfather had indeed changed his will, leaving me his vintage car collection, his art, and a significant portion of his investments. My parents and Charlotte received nominal amounts in comparison. "I didn't know about this," I whispered, though even to my own ears it sounded like a lie. "Convenient," Charlotte sniffed. "Just like you didn't know about the journal where Grandpa wrote how you told him Mom and Dad were already planning to sell his collections before he was even gone. Or how you suggested that Charlotte had been asking about the value of his watches while he was in the hospital," my mother added finally, looking at me with eyes that had gone from warm to glacial. The accusations continued, each more outlandish than the last, each a perfect distortion of the genuine conversations I'd had with grandfather. Someone, Charlotte, had taken the framework of truth and filled it with poisonous lies. Our family lawyer, Mr. Winters, who had known us since we were children, sat uncomfortably throughout the confrontation. Perhaps we should all take some time to cool down, he suggested. Grief affects people in different ways, and… No, my father interrupted. There's nothing more to discuss. The evidence is clear. He stood up, physically towering over me, as he had not done since I was a child. You have until tomorrow to collect your personal belongings. Anything you leave behind will be donated or discarded. Dad, please, I begged, reaching for his hand. He stepped back as if my touch might contaminate him. Don't call me that, he said quietly. No daughter of mine would do what you've done. The pain of those words cut deeper than any physical wound could have. In that moment, something inside me broke. I looked at Charlotte, who now had her arm around our mother in a show of support. You know the truth, I said to her directly. Whatever game you're playing, it's not worth this. Charlotte's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. The only person playing games was you, Olivia. I trusted you. We all did. I turned to Mr. Winters, desperate for an ally. The amendment to the will, could grandfather have been coerced? Or could it be forged? Mr. Winters shifted uncomfortably. The document appears legitimate. 2 witnesses signed it, neither related to the family. And your grandfather was evaluated by his physician the same day, and found to be of sound mind. That was when I realized the depth of Charlotte's planning. This wasn't a spontaneous accusation born of grief or jealousy. This was calculated, methodical character assassination. While I had been naively helping grandfather organize his affairs, Charlotte had been orchestrating my exile. You have nothing more to say in this house, my father said. Get out. I stood on shaky legs, dignity the only thing I had left to cling to. I didn't do this, I said, one final time, and someday you'll know the truth. No one responded. No one followed me to the door. 23 years as a daughter, a sister, a granddaughter, erased in less than an hour. I drove to my apartment in New York in a daze, tears blurring the highway lights into streaks of gold against the darkness. I called Michael as soon as I arrived home, desperate to hear a friendly voice, to have someone believe me. I need to see you, I said, my voice raw from crying. Something terrible has happened. His response was hesitant. Actually, Charlotte called me earlier. She told me what happened, Liv. The use of my nickname gave me a momentary hope. Then you know it's not true. You know I wouldn't do that. The silence on the line lasted too long. I don't know what to think, he finally said. She had details, Liv. Things about conversations you and your grandfather had that you told me about. My blood ran cold. I had shared those precious moments with Michael, trusting him with the tender parts of my relationship with grandfather. Charlotte must have pumped him for information over the months, collecting ammunition for her attack. Michael, you've known me for 3 years, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Do you honestly believe I would manipulate my dying grandfather for money? Another painful silence. I need some time to process this. Let's talk in a few days. But we never did. Michael ghosted me, his number eventually disconnected. I learned through a mutual friend that he and Charlotte had started dating less than a month after our conversation. It was the final betrayal in Charlotte's grand design. She hadn't just stolen my family, she'd taken the future I had planned as well. The following months were the darkest of my life. I threw myself into work, staying at the office until midnight most nights, because my empty apartment held too many memories. I tried reaching out to my parents several times, letters, emails, even standing outside their house during the holidays, gifts in hand, but was met with locked doors and returned mail. I hired a private investigator to look into the journal and the will amendment, hoping to find evidence of forgery or manipulation. 6 weeks and several $1,000s later, he reported that everything appeared legitimate. Charlotte had covered her tracks meticulously. Sometimes he told me sympathetically, you have to accept that you can't prove a negative. If there's no evidence you did something wrong, but also no evidence someone else framed you, courts tend to maintain the status quo. Which meant grandfather's will stood as written. The bitter irony was that I had inherited significant wealth from a man whose family now believed I had betrayed, yet the inheritance felt tainted. I couldn't bring myself to sell any of his possessions, instead putting them in climate-controlled storage, preserving them for a reconciliation I wasn't sure would ever come. As the one-year anniversary of my exile approached, I made one final attempt at contact, sending my mother flowers on her birthday, with a card that simply read, "I still love you, I always will. Olivia." The flowers were delivered back to my apartment the next day, the card torn to pieces. That was when I knew I had to rebuild my life without them. The realization that I would never be welcomed back into my family struck me with the force of physical pain. For days, I couldn't eat or sleep. I called in sick to work and lay curled on my couch, replaying every moment of my life, searching for signs I should have seen, words I could have said differently. The what-ifs became a torturous loop in my mind. It was my neighbor Mrs. Chen who ultimately pulled me from the darkness. She had noticed my absence from our usual morning elevator chats and knocked on my door with a container of homemade dumplings. "You don't have to tell me what's wrong," she said gently but firmly, guiding me to my kitchen table. "But you have to eat. Then shower. Then we talk if you want." The simple human kindness broke something open inside me. As I ate the first real meal I'd had in days, I found myself telling this woman whom I'd previously exchanged nothing more than pleasantries with everything. "Mrs. Chen listened without interruption, her weathered hands folded neatly on my table. When I finished, she nodded once decisively. "In my village in China, there is saying, 'When old door closes, break window,'" she said with a wry smile. "Not very elegant but true. Your family door is closed. So now you make new family." "I don't know how," I admitted. "You start by living," she replied simply. The next day, I returned to work with a new resolve. If I couldn't have the family I was born into, I would build connections that couldn't be severed by lies. I threw myself into building genuine relationships with colleagues, joined a book club, volunteered at a literacy center, teaching adults to read. 6 months later, I was offered a promotion that would require relocating to Chicago. There was nothing holding me to New York anymore. Michael was gone, my family was lost to me, and every street corner held memories that stung. I accepted the position. Chicago became my rebirth. The city's architectural grandeur and lakefront beauty spoke to something in my soul that needed rebuilding. I bought a small but charming brownstone in Lincoln Park and spent weekends restoring its original features, learning to use power tools from YouTube videos, and befriending the elderly owner of the local hardware store who called me kiddo, despite being shorter than my shoulder. At work, I channeled my pain into creativity, developing marketing campaigns that resonated with authentic human emotion. My team respected me, and I found satisfaction in mentoring younger colleagues. One of them, Zoe, became something like the sister I had lost, though I was careful to maintain appropriate professional boundaries, the ghost of Charlotte's betrayal making me wary of getting too close to anyone. 4 years into my Chicago life, I met David at a charity auction for the Literacy Center. He outbid me for a first edition Hemingway, then offered to let me borrow it any time. His easy smile and quiet confidence drew me in, but it was his patience that ultimately won my trust. When I finally told him about my family after 6 months of dating, he didn't offer platitudes or solutions. He simply held me and said, "Their loss is immeasurable." David had his own complicated family history: parents who divorced bitterly when he was 12, a father who started a new family and largely forgot his first one. He understood the peculiar grief of being erased from someone's life. Together, we created holiday traditions that honored our pasts without being defined by them. On my 30th birthday, David proposed on the shore of Lake Michigan at sunrise. As he slipped the ring on my finger, his grandmother's sapphire reset in a modern platinum band, I felt a momentary pang realizing my parents wouldn't be at our wedding. No father to walk me down the aisle, no mother to help me choose a dress. We can elope if it's easier, David offered, perceptive, as always. No, I decided. I want a real wedding. With the family we've chosen. And so we were married in the garden of our Lincoln Park home, with Mrs. Chen, who flew in from New York, in the front row. My colleagues turned friends serving as bridesmaids, and David's mother embracing me as the daughter she'd always wanted. It wasn't the wedding I had imagined as a girl, but it was filled with more genuine love than I had experienced in years. 2 years later, I gave birth to our daughter Ellie. Holding her for the first time, I was overcome by a fierce protectiveness. "I will never let anyone turn you against someone who loves you," I whispered to her, "and I will always, always listen to your side of the story." As Ellie grew, I sometimes caught myself looking for traces of my parents in her features, my father's determined chin, my mother's artistic hands. I kept a private album of family photos hidden in my closet occasionally, showing Ellie pictures of the grandparents she had never met. "Why don't they visit us?" she asked innocently when she was 4. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that are hard to fix," I explained, choosing my words carefully. "But it doesn't mean they wouldn't love you very much if they knew you." I debated reaching out when Ellie was born, sending photos or birth announcements, but the memory of those returned flowers stopped me. The wound had scarred over, and I was afraid to tear it open again. Instead, I channeled my energy into being the best mother I could be, creating the secure family environment for Ellie that had been ripped away from me. By the 10-year mark of my estrangement, I had built a life that many would envy. I had been promoted to creative director at my agency. David's architectural practice was thriving. We had a beautiful home, a healthy child, and friends who had become our chosen family. I had even published a children's book inspired by bedtime stories. I told Ellie something I had dreamed of doing since I was young. On paper, I had moved on. But there were still nights when I would wake from dreams of my childhood home, the scent of my mother's perfume lingering in my consciousness, my father's laugh echoing in my ears. The loss never fully disappeared, it just became a part of me, like a phantom limb that still itches years after amputation. I had no way of knowing that the carefully constructed piece of my new life was about to be disrupted by a single envelope bearing my parents' return address, the first communication in 12 long years. It was an ordinary Tuesday in March when the letter arrived. Chicago was just beginning to thaw from winter's grip, tiny green shoots pushing through the soil in our garden boxes. I had been working from home, taking advantage of the unusually warm day to set up my laptop on the back deck, while Ellie, now 6, played with her friend from next door, under the watchful eye of their nanny. The mail slot clattered, and I absently gathered the pile while on a conference call, sorting bills from catalogs, without paying much attention. It wasn't until the call ended that I noticed the cream-colored envelope with the familiar handwriting. My mother's distinctive slant, the way she crossed her T's with a slight upward curve. My hands began to shake so badly that I dropped the entire stack of mail. Ellie glanced over from where she was building an elaborate fairy house from twigs and leaves. "Mommy, are you okay?" I forced a smile. "Yes, sweetheart, just clumsy today." I picked up the envelope, running my finger over the embossed return address, 42 Maple Avenue, Maplewood, Connecticut. They still lived in the same house. For some reason, this detail made my throat tighten with emotion. While my life had transformed entirely, some things remained unchanged. The house where I had grown up, where I had last seen my family 12 years ago, still stood as if frozen in time. I couldn't open it immediately. I slipped the envelope into my desk drawer and tried to focus on work, but my concentration was shattered. What could they possibly want after all this time? Had something happened to one of them? Was it a legal notice of some kind? The questions multiplied until I could no longer ignore them. After Ellie went to bed that night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at the kitchen island, and finally opened the letter, with David sitting supportively beside me. The envelope contained 2 separate letters. The first was written on my mother's personal stationery pale blue paper, with a border of forget-me-nots that I had given her for Christmas when I was 16. The irony wasn't lost on me. My dearest Olivia, how does one begin a letter like this? There are no greeting cards for, I've wronged my daughter catastrophically and don't deserve her forgiveness. I've drafted this letter 100 times over the past month, and no beginning seems adequate. So I will start with the simplest truth. We were wrong. Terribly, unforgivably wrong. Charlotte has confessed everything. The manipulation, the lies, the forged journal, all of it. For 12 years we have lived with a ghost in our home, the absence of you that we created through our own blind foolishness. Your father cannot write to you yet. His shame is too great, his grief too raw. When Charlotte finally told us the truth, he locked himself in your old bedroom for 2 days. He couldn't bear to face what we had done. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I don't have that right. I'm writing because you deserve to know the truth, and because selfishly perhaps I needed you to know that not a day has passed, that I haven't thought of you, missed you, loved you, from a distance I created. The second letter enclosed is from Charlotte. I haven't read it. She insisted it be sealed when she gave it to me. Whatever it contains, know that she came forward voluntarily. No one forced her confession. If you choose to contact us, we will answer. If you choose never to speak to us again, we will understand. The choice is entirely yours, as it should have been from the beginning. With love that never diminished even when my actions suggested otherwise. Mom, I sat in stunned silence reading and rereading the letter until the words blurred through my tears. David's arm tightened around my shoulders, his presence anchoring me as the room seemed to tilt and spin. Do you want to open Charlotte's letter now? He asked gently. Or take some time? I wiped my eyes. Now, I need to know everything. The second envelope was sealed with wax, a theatrical touch so typical of Charlotte that it almost made me laugh, despite everything. The paper inside was thick, expensive stationery I didn't recognize, filled with my sister's flowing script. Olivia, I don't expect you to read this. I wouldn't in your position. But in case you are, I won't insult you with excuses. What I did was unforgivable. The jealousy and resentment I felt toward you festered until it consumed me. I convinced myself that you had everything: the intelligence our parents respect, Michael's love, and that you didn't deserve it all. It started small. The idea came when I overheard grandfather telling you about changing his will. I saw an opportunity and took it. The journal was easy. I had been practicing his handwriting for years, forging notes to get out of gym class. The stories about you turning him against us were calculated to play on Mom and Dad's deepest insecurities. I never expected them to cut you off completely. I thought they would just be angry that you would be the disappointment for once instead of me. By the time I realized how far it had gone, I was trapped in my own lie. Admitting the truth would mean losing everything: their love, their trust, the life I had built on your absence. So why confess now? Last month I was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. The prognosis is uncertain. Facing mortality has a way of burning through the rationalizations we build to live with ourselves. I don't tell you this to gain sympathy. I tell you because it forced me to confront what kind of person I've become and what legacy I would leave behind. I couldn't bear for my final act in this life to be the continued punishment of an innocent person, especially my sister. I've told Mom and Dad everything. I've written out a formal statement and had it notarized admitting to the forgery and manipulation. Mr. Winters has a copy. I've also transferred half of my assets into a trust for you, not as compensation, because there can be none, but as a gesture of atonement. For what it's worth, Michael and I didn't last 6 months. He called out your name once when we were together, and after that I couldn't stand to look at him. Last I heard, he's divorced with 2 kids in Seattle. I don't ask for forgiveness. I only hope that someday, the sharp edge of what I've done might dull enough that you can find peace with or without us in your life. Charlotte 1, set the letter down slowly, feeling as if I were moving underwater. 12 years of pain, of questioning myself, of rebuilding from ashes, all because of jealousy so deep it had corrupted everything it touched. "What are you thinking?" David asked, his voice bringing me back to the present. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "I need to process this." The emotions came in waves over the following days: vindication, rage, grief for the years lost, tentative hope, fear of being hurt again. I took long walks along the lake, trying to sort through what I wanted to do next. "Would you want to see them?" David asked one evening as we sat on our deck watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Your parents, Charlotte." I thought of Ellie, who had never known her grandparents, who had never experienced the warmth of my father's bear hugs, or heard my mother's infectious laugh. "I think I need to see them," I said slowly. "Not for their sake, but for mine. And for Ellie. I need to look them in the eye and decide if there's anything left to salvage." That night I crafted a brief email to the address my mother had included at the bottom of her letter. "I received your letters. I'm still processing everything. I will be in Connecticut next weekend. We can meet at the Riverside Cafe at 11 a.m. on Saturday if that works for you. I'll be bringing my husband David. Our daughter Ellie will not be with us for this first meeting. Olivia." The response came within minutes, as if my mother had been sitting by her computer waiting. "We'll be there. Thank you for this chance." I stared at those 7 words for a long time, wondering if 12 years of silence could begin to be bridged by a single coffee meeting. There was only one way to find out. "You know, before I continue with what happened at that meeting, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to decide whether to forgive someone who hurt you deeply? It's one of life's toughest choices, and I'm curious about your experiences. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and while you're there, hit that like button if you're invested in this family drama. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next in this story of betrayal and possible redemption. Now let me tell you about the most nerve-wracking cafe meeting of my life. The flight to Connecticut felt interminable. David held my hand as the plane descended through clouds, revealing the familiar landscape of my childhood. The rental car we picked up at the airport was sleek and anonymous, nothing like the old station wagon my father used to drive us to school in. But as we navigated the streets of Maplewood, memories flooded back with such intensity that I had to pull over once to catch my breath. "We can turn around," David offered. "Go back to Chicago. You don't owe them this." I shook my head. "I need closure one way or another." We checked into a hotel rather than staying at my parents' house, a boundary I needed to maintain. That night I barely slept, rehearsing what I would say, imagining their faces, picturing Charlotte perhaps gaunt from cancer treatments. Would I feel pity for her satisfaction? The thought troubled me. The Riverside Cafe hadn't existed when I lived in Maplewood. It was housed in what used to be an old hardware store where my father would take me on Saturday mornings, letting me choose a small item, a colorful washer, a smooth stone from the landscaping bin as a treasure while he gathered supplies for his weekend projects. David and I arrived 15 minutes early, securing a table by the window overlooking the small river that gave the cafe its name. I ordered tea. I couldn't drink, my stomach too knotted to accept even liquids. At precisely 11 a.m. they walked in. My mother, first thinner than I, remembered her once auburn hair, now completely silver, but still worn in the same elegant twist. My father followed, shoulders slightly stooped, the confident stride I had inherited, now reduced to a cautious gait. Charlotte came last. And I was shocked by her appearance. I had imagined her weakened by cancer, but instead she looked immaculate as always. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, hair artfully styled, though significantly thinner than I remembered, her cheekbones now sharp enough to cast shadows. They spotted us immediately. My mother halted mid-step, her hand flying to her mouth. My father steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Charlotte hung back, her expression unreadable. The moment stretched, suspended in time, until David gently nudged me. I stood on legs that felt disconnected from my body. Somehow I found myself in my mother's embrace, her familiar perfume, the same she'd worn my entire life, enveloping me. She was crying, murmuring my name over and over like a prayer. When she finally released me, my father stepped forward hesitantly. "Olivia," he said, his voice breaking. He looked older than his 68 years, grief etched into the lines around his eyes. I didn't move to embrace him. "Dad," I acknowledged with a nod. Charlotte remained a few steps back, her eyes downcast. Up close I could see what the perfect makeup concealed at a distance: the pallor beneath her foundation, the slight yellowish tint to her skin that spoke of liver involvement, the way she leaned subtly against a chair for support. We sat awkwardly, the four of us, around a table meant for intimate conversations, not excavating 12 years of absence. David introduced himself with the social grace I often lacked, easing the initial tension. "You have a daughter," my mother said. It wasn't a question, she had read my email. "Ellie." "Yes. She's 6. Do you have a picture?" she asked, hopefully. I hesitated, then pulled out my phone, scrolling to a recent photo of Ellie at her piano recital, her dark hair falling in waves around a face that I suddenly realized, as my parents leaned in to look, bore a striking resemblance to my mother. At the same age. "She's beautiful," my father said, his voice thick. "She has your determination in her eyes." An uncomfortable silence fell. There were too many questions, too much history to address over coffee and pastries that no one was eating. Finally Charlotte spoke. "I know nothing I say can undo what I did," she began, her voice steadier than I expected. "But I need you to know that Mom and Dad were victims too. They believed me because I was very convincing, and because the alternative, that their younger daughter was capable of such calculated cruelty, was unthinkable." "And yet, it was true," I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "You destroyed my life because you were jealous." She didn't flinch from the accusation. "Yes, I was consumed by it. You were everything. I wasn't disciplined, accomplished, genuinely good. I hated living in your shadow, but instead of working to create my own light, I tried to extinguish yours." The raw honesty of her admission caught me off guard. I had expected denials, minimizing excuses, not this straightforward acceptance of guilt. "What do you want from me now?" I asked, looking at each of them in turn. "Absolution. Forgiveness. To pretend the last 12 years didn't happen." My father leaned forward. "We want nothing that you're not willing to give, Olivia. We just—" His voice faltered. "We just wanted the chance to tell you to your face how profoundly sorry we are. How wrong we were. If you walk away after today and never speak to us again, we will respect that choice. Though it would break our hearts," my mother added softly. I looked at Charlotte. "And you, what do you want?" She met my eyes directly for the first time. "Time," she answered simply. "The doctors have given me about a year, maybe 18 months with aggressive treatment. I'd like to use that time to at least try to make amends, though I know complete atonement is impossible." Her words hung in the air between us. A year. After 12 years of separation, she was offering me one final year to rebuild something from the ashes of our relationship. David, who had been quietly supportive beside me, finally spoke. "Olivia has built a beautiful life despite what happened. She's an extraordinary mother, a brilliant professional, and the most loving partner anyone could ask for. Whatever you decide about moving forward, I want you to know what you missed, the remarkable woman she became without your support." Pride and gratitude swelled in my chest at his words. He was right. I had rebuilt, had thrived even. The scared, betrayed 23-year-old had transformed into someone stronger than I could have imagined. "I need time to think," I said finally. "This is overwhelming." "Of course," my mother said quickly. "We understand." As we prepared to leave, Charlotte reached into her purse and pulled out a small worn book. Grandfather's real journal, she said, placing it on the table. Not the one I forged. I've had it all these years. He wrote about you in it, about how proud he was. I think you should have it. I stared at the leather-bound volume, afraid to touch it, afraid of the emotions it might unleash. Thank you, I managed carefully, placing it in my own bag. We parted awkwardly, no hugs or promises, just a tentative agreement to be in contact again when I was ready. As David and I walked back to our rental car, I felt simultaneously drained and strangely light, as if a weight I had carried for so long had shifted, if not completely lifted. "What are you thinking?" David asked, as we drove back to the hotel. I gazed out at the town that had once been my entire world. "I'm thinking that revenge isn't what I thought it would be." Back in our hotel room, I finally opened my grandfather's journal, my hands trembling as I turned the first page. His familiar handwriting brought tears to my eyes, not the perfect calculated script of Charlotte's forgery, but his actual penmanship with its distinctive quirks and occasional ink blots. The journal covered the last 6 months of his life. Many entries were brief observations about his declining health, or memories from his youth that he feared would be lost. But scattered throughout were passages about his family, about all of us. October 12th, Olivia came by today with those almond cookies I love. She doesn't know, I can tell, she's been crying. That boyfriend of hers isn't worthy of her tears, but I kept my opinions to myself. She's strong, my Olivia. Stronger than she knows. Eleanor was the same at her age, a spine of steel beneath all that gentleness. November 3rd, Charlotte visited again. 3rd time this week. She asks a lot of questions about the will, about my collections. I'm not a fool, I know what she's fishing for. There's a hunger in that girl that I recognize from my brother Thomas. Never satisfied, always looking at what others have. I worry for her. Emptiness like that can't be filled with things or money. The entries continued, painting a picture of a man who saw his family with clear eyes, their strengths and their flaws. The final entry, dated just 3 days before his death, hit me the hardest. December 18th, told Olivia today about the safe behind the painting, left her the key around my neck. The collections, the investments, they're just things. The real inheritance is in that safe, the letters Eleanor wrote me when we were young, the first dollar I earned, Thomas's medals from the war. The story of our family, the good and the bad. Olivia will preserve it all, keep the truth alive. She understands what matters. I closed the journal overwhelmed. I had never found the safe, had never looked behind the painting. After the confrontation with my family, I had been too devastated to return to the house for anything beyond my immediate personal belongings. He knew, I whispered to David, who had been reading over my shoulder. He knew who Charlotte really was, who I was. He trusted me. Of course he did, David said. Anyone who truly knows you would. Over the next 2 days we remained in Connecticut. I drove past my childhood home, walked through my old neighborhood, even visited grandfather's grave for the first time. Each place held memories both painful and precious, but they no longer had the power to devastate me. On our last morning before flying back to Chicago, I made my decision. I called my parents and asked them to meet us, including Charlotte, at their house. It was time to see the home I had been banished from, to confront the ghosts that still lingered there. Walking through the front door was surreal. So much was exactly as I remembered: the grandfather clock in the foyer, the family photos on the walls, though I noticed with a pang that pictures of me had been returned to their places, as if trying to erase the years of my absence. Scent of my mother's favorite lemon polish on the wooden banisters. "Your room," my mother said hesitantly. "We never changed it. If you'd like to see it." I nodded, and we all climbed the stairs, an awkward procession of people connected by blood and severed by betrayal. My childhood bedroom was indeed preserved like a museum exhibit, my books still on the shelves, my high school track trophies still gleaming on the dresser, even the silly ceramic frog collection I had started at age 8, still arranged on The windowsill. You kept it all, I said, running my fingers over the spines of books I had outgrown half a lifetime ago. We always hoped. My father began, then stopped, unable to complete the thought. I turned to face them, these three people who had once been the center of my world. I need to be very clear about something, I said. What happened was not a misunderstanding or a mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty. I looked directly at Charlotte. You didn't just lie. You constructed an elaborate frame-up, practiced forging grandfather's handwriting, manipulated everyone, and then stole my boyfriend as a bonus act of spite. Charlotte nodded, accepting each accusation without defense. And you, I continued, turning to my parents, chose to believe the worst about me without even giving me a chance. You threw away 23 years of knowing who I was, in favor of a convenient narrative that required no self-reflection. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't finished. I've spent 12 years trying to understand how the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally could discard me so completely. I built a new life, a good life, because I had to. I'm not that wounded 23-year-old anymore, desperate for your approval or acceptance. I took a deep breath. That said, I have a daughter who deserves to know her family, her full family with all its flaws and complications. And I'm tired of carrying the weight of this estrangement. My father stepped forward cautiously. What are you saying, Olivia? I'm saying that I'm willing to try. Not to pretend nothing happened, not to go back to the way things were, that's impossible, but to build something new, something honest for whatever time we have. I glanced at Charlotte, acknowledging her diagnosis without directly referencing it. I want Ellie to meet her grandparents. I want her to know her aunt. But there will be boundaries and complete transparency. No more family secrets, no more lies, no more choosing sides. The relief on their faces was palpable, but I held up my hand. This isn't forgiveness, at least not yet. That may come with time. This is me choosing to move forward, rather than remain frozen in the past. If at any point I feel that the same patterns are re-emerging, I will walk away again, this time permanently. My mother wiped her tears. We understand. And we are so grateful for this chance, Olivia. More than you can know. Charlotte, who had been unnaturally quiet, finally spoke. What can I do to help rebuild, I mean? I considered the question carefully. Start by telling me everything, the whole truth, not just the highlights. I need to understand exactly how it happened, every step of the manipulation. No more secrets between us. She nodded. Today now, yes, I said firmly. But first, there's something else I need to see. I walked to grandfather's study, which appeared largely untouched since his death. The painting, a landscape of the Connecticut countryside that had hung there my entire life, was still on the wall behind his desk. I carefully removed it, revealing the small wall safe I had never had the chance to open. Do you have the key? I asked my parents. They exchanged confused glances. What key? The one grandfather wore on a chain around his neck. My father frowned. There was no key when he passed. The funeral home returned his personal effects, his watch, his wedding ring, but no key. All eyes turned to Charlotte. She sighed, reaching into her purse and extracting a small silver key on a thin chain. I took it when they were preparing him for the funeral, she admitted. I was afraid of what might be in there, more evidence of my lies perhaps. I never used it. I couldn't bring myself to. I took the key from her outstretched hand. Our fingers brushed briefly, the first physical contact between us in 12 years. I inserted the key into the lock, turned it, and opened the door to the past my grandfather had preserved for me, for all of us. Inside was exactly what his journal had described: letters tied with faded ribbons, old photographs, medals, and a small envelope with my name written on it in his hand. I opened it with reverent care. My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you've found your way to the truth I've tried to preserve. Family is complicated, a tapestry of love and resentment, loyalty and betrayal, woven together by blood and choice. Some threads strengthen the whole, others threaten to unravel it. I've watched you grow into a woman of integrity and compassion. Whatever happens after I'm gone, remember this: the strongest family bonds aren't the ones we're born with, but the ones we choose to nurture and protect even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. All my love, grandfather. I read the letter aloud, my voice steady, despite the emotion welling in my chest. When I finished, the room was silent except for the soft ticking of grandfather's old desk clock. He knew something like this might happen, I said finally. He was trying to warn me. He always saw everything so clearly, my mother said softly. We should have trusted his judgment about both of you. In that moment, standing in grandfather's study with his words hanging in the air between us, I felt a shift, not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of it. The foundation of something new being laid where the old structure had been destroyed. 1 year later, we gathered in the garden of my childhood home, to scatter Charlotte's ashes beneath the maple tree where we had played as children. Ellie stood between her grandparents, her small hand in my father's larger one, while David's arm supported me around my waist. Charlotte had spent her final months in relentless pursuit of atonement, documenting her deception in detail, reconnecting me with old friends by confessing her lies, and building a genuine relationship with Ellie through video calls and 3 precious visits. In the end, it wasn't perfect forgiveness that healed us, but the daily choice to move forward together. Thank you so much for listening to my story of family betrayal, long separation, and eventual reconciliation. I'm curious, have you ever experienced a situation where karma or justice finally came around after years of waiting? Or have you had to make the difficult decision between holding on to anger or attempting to rebuild a damaged relationship? Share your experiences in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more true family stories where justice finally prevails. Your support means the world to me and helps these stories reach others who might be going through similar struggles. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that even after years of pain, healing is possible. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most powerful form of revenge isn't making others suffer, it's reclaiming your own happiness and writing a new ending to your story.